Welcome, everyone, to Net Zero Travel and Tourism From Ambition to Action, a Climate Week special event organized by the World Travel and Tourism Council. I'm Arnie Weissman, Editor in Chief of Travel Weekly US, and I'm going to be your moderator today. No corner of the world or sector of industry is immune from the devastating impact of climate change, from rising temperatures to extreme weather events and rising sea levels. Travel and tourism, a sector which is still reeling from COVID-19, is uniquely exposed to the climate emergency, being dependent on the places and people who are now at risk. While the sector has showcased a commitment to act, announcing ambitious climate commitments and activities developed by companies and industry associations, its efforts and progress remain fragmented within and across its sectors. How can these sectors proactively and jointly face these significant challenges and turn them into opportunities? They must, as every industry must, move swiftly and effectively towards net zero carbon emissions in order to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Agreement target. Today, we're going to hear from industry leadership from several sectors, as well as environmental advocates about what they're doing and how they are addressing climate change. Before I introduce the speakers, I did want to share the definitions of two phrases you are likely to hear repeatedly today. The term carbon neutrality allows for carbon emissions as long as they are offset by a reduction of carbon emissions elsewhere, whereas the term net zero requires the lowering of carbon in total and does not allow offsetting. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Julia Simpson, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Travel and Tourism Council, for opening remarks. Julia and I met for the first time in London on Monday, just an hour before President Biden announced new rules allowing vaccinated travelers to visit us here in the States. And there was definitely an additional bounce in her step after she heard the news. So Julia, the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Arnie. A good afternoon and good evening to everyone joining us today. As world leaders gather at the United Nations General Assembly to address the most critical issue facing humankind, I am delighted to be hosting my first WTTC event during New York Climate Week, where we bring together so many critical players to raise awareness and push for accelerated change to fight the climate crisis. Unfortunately, we couldn't be in New York in person, but we still wanted to host this event virtually to bring our members and governments together to discuss the challenges ahead and how collectively we can advance towards a net zero future. I want to thank our panelists as well as IHG for supporting this event. I would also like to thank our strategic partners, the Ministry of Tourism of Saudi Arabia, Amex, the Philippines, and Global Rescue. As you all know, the travel and tourism sector encompasses a large number and a variety of industries, from hotels to travel agents, cruises to airlines and airports, and digital innovators. It is an extensive and complex value chain that offers large opportunities for the sector to be a catalyst for positive change. Like all human activity, our sector is both a contributor to climate change and part of the solution. Travel and tourism represents 10.4% of the global economy. It creates 330 million jobs. We clearly have an important role to play. Just to recap what Arnie was saying, the recent IPCC report outlines one of the greatest challenges of our time: to stay within the 1.5 degree trajectory. Every fraction of a degree matters. As such, a sustainable and inclusive travel and tourism sector has a crucial role to play, providing decent jobs, stable incomes, and protecting our cultural and natural heritage. While climate change itself poses significant risks to some destinations, tourism can help build resilience. Because we need change to happen, and we need this to happen fast, WTTC has put climate change front and centre of its priorities. In 2019, WTTC became a signatory of the UNFCCC's Climate Neutral Now (CNN) initiative and announced a first aspirational target for the sector to be climate neutral by 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement. While 2020 was dedicated almost entirely to the survival and critical recovery from the most devastating health crisis to ever have hit our sector, our work on sustainability and that of our members has continued apace. Every industry in travel and tourism is making strong progress in this field. We thank our members for their active engagement and commitment that has led to this ambitious strategy. In this light, I'm delighted to announce WTTC, in collaboration with the UN Environment Programme and Accenture, will launch our Net Zero Roadmap for the travel and tourism sector at COP26. This important piece of work will chart the way to net zero by 2050. The document will include an overview of the many climate actions in the sector and illustrate the ambitious industry milestones for meaningful climate change and emissions reductions, which we will monitor and update on a regular basis. We are very grateful to the organisations that have contributed to this effort, including the UNFCCC, CLEAR, WWF and Travelist, to name just but a few, as well, of course, our members themselves. As the sector contains so many diverse industries, it has been a challenge to produce baseline data to measure our footprint and, as importantly, to track the progress. I am therefore delighted to announce that we will soon expand our world-renowned economic impact reporting to include environmental and social indicators. As we all know, you can't manage what you can't measure. Now we'll have regular, robust and transparent reporting on travel and tourism's footprint. As part of today's session, we will focus on how business in travel and tourism can play a role in climate mitigation and resilience, and we will highlight our key challenges relating to decarbonisation. Again, thank you everyone for joining today. We look forward to a really fruitful discussion and insights from a truly excellent panel of speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I'd now like to welcome Gonzalo Munoz, designated as High-Level Climate Champion of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UN entity tasked with supporting the global response to the threats related to climate change. Gonzalo?
Thanks so much, Arnie, and congrats for this instance. I would like to first thank all for having me today. It's a real privilege to have the opportunity to discuss the importance of climate change in travel and tourism with all of you, and mostly in this relevant week ahead of COP26 and in this critical year. Also, of course, acknowledging everything that the sector has gone through during the pandemic. So as you said, I have the honor of being one of the two United Nations high-level climate action champions, in my case, appointed by the Chilean government for COP25, sorry, and working in close partnership with my dear friend Nigel Topping, the other United Nations high-level champion, and in this case for COP26. And our role as climate champions is to move the ambition and action that are taken by what are called the non-state actors in addressing climate change. And non-state actors is a way to refer to mostly, on one side, subnational governments, meaning states, for example, the states of the United States or Brazil or Australia or the European Union, but then cities, businesses, investors, academia. And to fulfill our mandate, we have launched mostly 3 big campaigns. We will refer today to Race to Zero. Then we have another one that is called Race to Resilience, building the resilience that is required for people that need to confront the crisis that is already hitting them and to build that resilience in this decade. And then the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero with Mark Carney, mobilizing the financial sector. So when it comes to Race to Zero, it's a UN campaign that we launched back in June last year, back in June 2020, rallying all non-state actors from across the global economy to take those rigorous and immediate actions on one side to have global emissions by 2030. That's what science is telling us we need to do urgently, and then reach net zero by 2050 as soon as possible, by 2050 at the very latest. The campaign is now covering a range of sectors where we aim to deliver a healthier, fairer, and more resilient low carbon world as is required. And we also acknowledge the importance, of course, as I said, of adaptation. And Julia, you referred to it very properly. We have launched our sister campaign, Race to Resilience, earlier this year. So let's focus on the travel and tourism sector and the actions that all non-state actors can take to help the sector build the resilience and achieve net zero. Firstly, the sector we know plays a real significant role in the global GDP, and in that sense, the WTTC estimates that it contributes to 10.4% of global GDP in 2019. Between then 2014 and 2019 is a sector that created a quarter of new jobs worldwide. This ranges across all parts of the complex sector, from aviation to hotels, tour operators, travel agencies. We know that travel and tourism is particularly important to certain countries, such as the small island developing nations, or what we call now the big ocean states, where tourism can be the main sector of the economy. And I'm here in New York having some bilaterals today. I was with the ambassador of the small island states, speaking about the importance of this sector for all the region, but mostly in this case, the Caribbean islands. Up until last year, the sector was consistently growing and forecasted to grow about another 25% by 2030. That's the level of importance that it represents in the global GDP, in the economy, when it comes to labor, but then of course, when it comes to the environmental impact as well. However, of course, the impacts of COVID-19 have devastated the sector. We have to know that we're standing from there, where international arrivals have decreased by 74% in 2020 and over 120 million tourism jobs put in risk. Though the sector has experienced a halt in 2020, the post-pandemic world presents a big relevant opportunity to build back better. This is key in both climate mitigation and adaptation, where the sector has large direct impact on certain ecosystems such as mangroves, which are absolutely key to protecting vulnerable communities against flooding and natural disasters. Travel and tourism companies should and must return to operating with sustainability at the core. That's the main opportunity. So that sector plays its important role in helping the world achieve net zero. The recent IPCC report we received last month has shown us how critical it is for everyone to play their part in mitigating climate change and building climate resilience. There is a chance for us to stay within the 1.5-degree trajectory, and we need to do everything that we can to do so. Every fraction of a degree matters. This is not only a moral duty, it's a real important opportunity and a matter of development. In the new world, we hope to see radical collaboration across the sector on this agenda, and we cannot win this race alone, but only together. Companies can start by collaborating to help define sector scopes and net zero methods as the pathway that Julia just referred to. We need to align on science-backed commitment through initiatives such as the Science-Based Targets Business Ambition for 1.5-degree initiative. Rebuilding will also mean rethinking business model in tourism, where we explore low carbon transport modes and renewable energy sources to power and infrastructure. The growth of ecotourism has demonstrated companies can find competitiveness in a sustainable world, demonstrating the triple bottom line impact of growing profits, protecting our people, and contributing to the planet. Lastly, given the economic importance of the sector, it plays a real key role in public-private partnership and shaping policies and country-level narratives for the sector. We encourage all businesses to be engaged with governments and work together to build a sustainable economy. So looking ahead to COP26, we recognize organizations who have joined the race to zero and are now leading the way of net zero for the sector. We encourage the remaining actors to join the race. We need everybody in the race and then running as fast as we can and work with industry peers to transform and reshape the sector. Travel and tourism has a unique opportunity to build back better now, and this is our time to take the opportunity. Thank you again for having me today, and really look forward to the interesting discussion today and meeting many of you in Glasgow for positioning the tourism and travel sector where it has to be. Protecting nature, protecting people, and bringing value to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And now let's all watch a message from Patricia Espinosa, the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
I am pleased to join the World Travel and Tourism Council at New York Climate Week. In September 2019, I and Gloria Guevara, the Council's former CEO, launched the Council's Sustainability Action Plan. I thank her for her leadership and look forward to working with her successor, Julia Simpson. When I spoke with you in December 2019, I noted that in 2018, tourism generated an astounding 10.4% of the global gross domestic product, more than 8.8 trillion US dollars. Amazing numbers. Then came COVID. I do not have to tell you how COVID harmed the tourism industry. You and your employees lived it. As you adapt to and recover from COVID, it is also an opportunity to work on climate change by putting in place actions to reduce carbon emissions, now and in the future. I am pleased to see the WTTC recognizes now as a time to achieve climate action goals. Work must be done. A 2018 study in the journal Nature found the tourism sector accounted for 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. We cannot continue like this if we hope to limit the rise of global temperatures to 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. We see the impact of the emissions and temperature increases around the world: floods, droughts, heat waves, fires, and hurricanes. From 1998 to 2017, direct economic losses from disasters were estimated at almost $3 trillion US dollars. Climate-related disasters accounted for 77% of that total. In 2021, we saw devastation, including, of course, tourism declines due to Hurricane Ida in the Western Hemisphere and from heat waves and wildfires in Europe and North America. Climate change threatens all of us, everywhere. Tourism industry leaders and operators can reduce that threat by taking concrete action now, including living up to the WTTC's Sustainable Action Plan and following the Net Zero Roadmap for Travel and Tourism after its release at COP26 in November. Setting these goals and designing actions to reach them shows the industry is on track to reach success. I ask all WTTC members to fully support these initiatives. Change is needed if we want to see a sustainable, resilient future, not just for the sector, but for the planet and its people. UN Climate Change is pleased to support WTTC's efforts to make sustainable change, and we look forward to seeing you reach these goals. Thank you.
Great summation of where we are and where we need to be. And it's not only the private businesses in travel and tourism that must confront and address the pressing concerns of climate change, but destinations must take action as well. We have a video keynote today from His Excellency Ahmed Al Khateeb, the Minister of Tourism of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who will share what his nation is doing in regards to climate change.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I'm delighted to be here with you virtually today in New York to mark Climate Week with the WTTC. I hope that next time our paths cross, it will be in person. May I start by thanking Chris Nesta, former chair of the WTTC, and the new chair, my friend Arnold Donald, for their leadership. I would also like to thank our host, Julia Simpson, and to welcome you in your new role as a CEO. The WTTC has done much to lead the conversation on sustainability in tourism, and it is a privilege to be part of this discussion today, as well as to be alongside Patricia Espinosa, Director General of the UNFCCC. There is no doubt that we are facing one of the greatest collective global challenges of our time. The latest IPCC report on climate change makes clear we need to take action now. As the report says, this might be the hottest summer of our lives. Wildfires have caused devastation across the world, from America to Europe to North Africa. But if we do nothing, 2021 may also be the coolest summer of the rest of our lives. The challenges of climate change is widespread, and for all of us, the scale of the threat posed is daunting. But a poll by Oxford University, the UNDP earlier this year, found that 64% of people believe climate change is a global emergency, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So, I want my message today to be one of the resilience. I believe that we can make a real and meaningful difference. That difference comes from committing to making the changes to limit climate change impact and putting in place the investment necessary to adapt. And that is certainly the approach that we are taking in Saudi Arabia. In March this year, we launched the Saudi Green Initiative. We are taking bold steps, refusing to believe the false choice between preserving the economy and protecting the environment. By 2030, we aim to produce 50% of Saudi Arabia electricity from renewable sources, eliminating more than 130 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions through clean hydrocarbon technologies. Our Public Investment Fund recently announced the establishment of the first voluntarily carbon trading scheme in the Middle East. The scheme aims to allow oil and gas producing countries to fulfill their commitment under the Paris Accord and play their full role in tackling climate change. These initiatives build on our G20 presidency in 2020, where several climate policy initiatives were launched. We are all here today as we know the travel and tourism industry has a pivotal role to play in tackling climate change. The sector has already acknowledged this. Not only do our consumers want to see destinations that are more sustainable and that match their own personal desires to make green choices, but the industry itself is also taking great strides toward greater sustainability. Worldwide, the cruise industry has invested more than $23.5 billion in ships with new technologies and cleaner fuels to reduce air emissions and achieve greater energy efficiency. And hotels have reduced carbon emissions, energy and water usage, as well as working to reduce or remove single-use plastics. And other parts of the tourism sector are also working hard at the cutting edge of sustainability and green innovation. For example, Costa Rica is on path towards net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This is a hugely ambitious objective which will require all parts of the country's economy and society to change the way it operates. Costa Rica depends on tourism, and its holistic, integrated approach to carbon emissions reflect the holistic, integrated nature of the tourism sector as well, and sector that unites economies and countries across boundaries and borders. This unified approach is vital, and it is reflected in our own plans to launch a global sustainability initiative that will be multi-countries, multi-stakeholders, to include NGOs, academia, travelers, governments, and the private sector. I look forward to saying more about this exciting, world-leading project soon. I hope that many of you will join us in this initiative. I believe that these approaches show the value of bold thinking. We can be bolder by not simply considering how to embed sustainability across existing business models and practices. We can see the wider view of the nature of tourism and the role that it plays across societies and economies. And we can understand how we not only balance but drive forwards a more sustainable tourism industry with resilience at its core and able to withstand the shocks of the future. This will require a new approach to tourism, one that is more coordinated and more collaborative, particularly at international level. The pandemic highlighted that multilateral cooperation is essential, as we saw many governments lacked the support they needed to respond effectively. We need to collaborate between the public and private sector. We must ensure that tourism speaks with one voice across industry and borders, so that no one is left behind, and so that our collaborative ideas and efforts drive sustained changes. We need a plan, and we need to act now. We have a responsibility to those whose livelihoods depend on tourism. We have been listening and responding to requests for support from many parts of the world, identifying solutions, securing multinational commitment, and driving investments that make change happen. I look forward to continuing to drive this important international dialogue forward, along with many counterparts in governments and in international private sector. And I look forward to continuing a close and supportive relationship with the WTTC. Together, we can ensure a more sustainable, more resilient future for tourism. And I invite you all to join Saudi Arabia in our efforts to make tourism part of the solution to achieving global goals on sustainable development and climate change. Thank you.
Look forward to hearing more about those details that Minister Al-Khateeb mentioned about Saudi Arabia's ambitious agenda. Now, it's true that every sector of the travel industry faces different realities and challenges in their quest to reach net zero carbon emissions. Some, like hotels, are tied to specific locales. Others, like airlines and cruise ships, are themselves travelers moving from place to place. To explore how companies in various travel sectors are approaching the journey to net zero emissions, WTTC has assembled a panel of industry leaders, each facing a different set of challenge. I'd now like to welcome to the virtual stage Arnold Donald, Chairman of WTTC and Chief Executive Officer of the Carnival Corporation, Elie Maalouf, Chief Executive Officer Americas for IHG Hotels and Resorts, Gilda Perez-Alvarado, Global Chief Executive Officer of the hospitality consulting firm JLL Hotels and Hospitality. Alex Zozaya, Chairman, Apple Leisure Group. And Ben Murphy, Head of Sustainability for Boom Supersonic, a company designing and manufacturing what will be fleets of supersonic jets, the first to go airborne in 2029. Arnold, let me begin with you, and I'm going to ask you to respond as chairman of WTTC rather than as chief executive of Carnival Corporation. So decarbonization of travel and tourism is clearly important. From your position as WTTC chair, what are you seeing as encouraging advancements? And what have you identified as the major challenges yet to be addressed?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, Arnie, and good to be with the rest of the panelists and the speakers that have gone before. So good afternoon, everyone in New York or virtual, wherever you are. As chair of WTTC, I think the most inspiring thing is to see across so many different sectors in travel and tourism, the level of commitment to get ultimately to zero emission and the level of focus and effort in all the sectors to make that happen. I know you don't want to talk about cruise per se, but I'll say a little bit about the cruise industry. You know, the data we've seen, or I've seen written that the level of emissions were so small as an industry, you couldn't measure it if we didn't exist. Okay, that it would be no material impact on emissions. But I'm sure that's true for lots of industries, and it's the cumulative effect that causes the problems. And so we're totally focused as an industry and as a company on absolute getting to zero emission. As a company, we were the first to join as a cruise company, the Getting to Zero Coalition effort. That's an effort totally focused on maritime, energy, infrastructure, finance sectors, all committed to accelerating the decarbonization of the international shipping industry. And it includes scalable infrastructure for zero carbon energy sources, including production, distribution, storage, and bunkering, et cetera. We built the first LNG ships for the cruise industry. We have 4, we have 7 more on the way. Those don't get us to zero, but they're a step in the right direction. And we've aligned with the IMO objectives on a 40% reduction in carbon intensity by 2030, and then ultimately getting to a 50% absolute carbon reduction in by 2050, 2030 on the 40%. And then by 2050, we've added for ourselves, we'd like to be carbon neutral. Now, the technologies don't exist today and the combination doesn't, but we have the confidence in the science and partnering with others. And on the 2030 objective of 40% reduction, we've added a second because that one is based on distance. So you can still have some absolute increases. Ours is based on capacity. We peaked in carbon emissions in 2011. We've grown our capacity 25% since then, but still we have less carbon emissions today than we did in 2011. And it's done through a host of things from itinerary planning, better equipment, switching to low emission and cleaner burning LNG, et cetera. And also shore power. Most of our fleet is, or now majority of our fleet, we can plug in and port where we can take advantage hopefully of more carbon neutral and more environmentally friendly power generation, et cetera. So those are just some examples, but there's a host across our industry, whether it's hotels, airlines, et cetera. And we have others on the panel who can speak to it.
Okay, and Arnold, I'd like now to ask you to respond as president and CEO of Carnival Corporation. So we mentioned earlier each sector faces troubles. You covered some of the things that I was going to be asking you about, but I mean, to get to a very fundamental question, could we expect to see not just carbon neutral, but a net zero cruise industry? And are net zero vessels even possible? What would a net zero vessel look like?
Today, of course, it's not possible, Arnie, but with battery technology advancements, lithium-ion battery, fuel cells, biofuels, et cetera, we could get to zero emission, and that is ultimately the goal. And that's what we aspire to. You know, offsets, you know, can play a role, right now, we're not focused on offsets. We would like to get to zero emission. But obviously, it can certainly play a role to help balance out so that the net impact on the environment, on the climate, is neutral. And so, but yeah, we can get there. It's going to take technology advancement. But as you can see, what happened with this pandemic, 18 months ago, people didn't even understand what COVID was, the epidemiology, anything. About 18, 19 months later, we have multiple vaccines, advancements in treatment, very in-depth understanding of how it's transmitted and the epidemiology of the virus, et cetera. So with science and technology, continuing investment, and a concerted effort of everyone on the planet, we do believe that it's not just an aspiration, it's a very real possibility to get to zero emission vessels.
Okay, thank you. So Elie, I have a question for you. IHG launched an internal sustainability program called Journey to Tomorrow, addressing the reduction of energy and carbon emissions, as well as reducing water usage and waste. What are your goals for decarbonization, and how are you going to achieve them? And are you aiming to use offsets for carbon neutrality, or are you targeting true net zero?
Arnie, thanks for having us today. And like everybody else, I hope next time we're able to meet in person in New York or elsewhere, and hopefully in one of our hotels. It's a lot more fun when we're doing it in person, a lot more engaging, and better for our business, actually. So look, first, let me just take you to the immediate news. Today, September 22nd, 2021, we're announcing our commitment to the 1.5% target, upgrading our target from 2% to 1.5%. That's a substantial commitment. It also allows us to join the UNFCCC race to zero. That's the UN endorsed campaign to rally leadership and support behind net zero. We are therefore aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement now, and our objective is to build just really momentum around this. Now, that's a heavy lift for us and for the industry, and we've got an ambitious plan to move in that direction. That's today's news. More broadly, our 10-year journey to tomorrow is focused on our people, our communities, and our planet. For our people, really promoting well-being in the workplace, championing an inclusive and diverse culture. For our communities, we have a commitment to improve the lives of 30 million people around the world over the next 10 years. We believe that healthy, prosperous communities are also ones that take care of the environment. It's very hard to be focused on the environment if you're looking for your next meal and you're not prospering as a society and as a community. So we want to improve the livelihoods of 30 million people around the world, which we believe drives environmental sustainability. And finally, our planet, which is the subject of our conversation today, reducing carbon emissions in line with climate science. And as I said today, committing to 1.5% trajectory, upgrading from 2%, eliminating single-use items in all of our hotels, reducing food waste, and collaborating with local stakeholders for water sustainability in water-starved parts of the world. We know that we have a water shortages in many parts of the world and excess water in other parts, probably due to some climate change too. I'll say that we've made substantial progress around carbon reduction. We made a commitment over the last 3 years to have a 6 to 7% reduction in our carbon intensity per hotel. And if you go to that period of time, we achieved nearly a 6% reduction. But more importantly, and partly thanks to the pandemic, unfortunately, we had a 24% reduction in the aggregate consumption and emissions of carbon in our hotels. So the key is, how do we take this forward into the next 10 years and reach a 1.5% target? That, if we stay on that course and we achieve that course, that takes us to net zero by 2050, according, to answer your question. It's a very ambitious project, and probably the most ambitious in the industry, one that we are disclosing data around and being very transparent about. And more importantly, it'll require collaboration, not just from science and from private industry. It'll require collaboration from government and energy producers. I don't think any of us will get there without decarbonization of the grid, without renewable energy making a larger and larger component of the energy grid. We can be as efficient as possible in our properties, but the energy that we acquire for those properties has to be heavily decarbonized around the world for us to be able to achieve this target. So we have our own very ambitious targets and the actions that we're going to take, many of our industry partners around the call today, and hopefully in the future we can say around the room, will be taking ambitious actions. But we need regulation and government to decarbonize the grid so we can meet our targets.
Okay, thank you, Elie. Gilda, you advise investors in the hospitality sector, and you just heard Elie describe what his company is doing. How concerned are investors about, for instance, the increase in climate-related extreme weather events and rising ocean levels, and no doubt of high interest to Elie? How important are climate risk disclosures becoming for investors?
Arnie, thanks very much for the question. I think it's very relevant, and I wish I could give you a uniform answer, but the reality is that there isn't one. I would say it really depends on the investor's hold horizon and where they are, which is the sad reality. So a lot of them are looking at climate change, risk, everything that is embodied in ESG in very different ways. I would say our investor base in Europe, it's the most conscientious and advanced in terms of actually having goals and investment criteria that match everything that we're talking about today. In the US, it's a hodgepodge of things. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is really hard to measure sustainability in the short to medium term. And so, as Julia mentioned at the beginning of the talk, if you cannot measure it, it's very hard to implement it. And a situation that we have here in the US, just to talk about the micro market, if you will. The hold horizon of most hotel owners in the United States varies. It's probably between 3 to 5 years' time. Making monetary commitments, capital expenditure commitments to address these changes in terms of retrofitting buildings, et cetera, it's very expensive. And it eats into their returns. So there's a very clear misalignment as to what the right thing to do long-term is versus having the investor get their high teen, low 20% IRR return during that whole period. That is the reality, right? So it is our obligation as an industry, as a sector, to put parameters in place in terms of, what are our short-term objectives and goals? What is the medium term? And obviously, what are we aiming for in 2030 and 2050? But the reality is, in today, practically speaking, there's a lot of pressure for investors to produce returns. The hospitality sector has seen its worst performance ever, right? The lights were turned off. We're now turning them back on in a dimmer, and they have to generate a return. So having them commit to a very big capital expenditure to make their building more energy efficient or do the right thing, it's very hard for a lot of investors to be able to quantify. In Europe, what is helping about it is obviously there's more, I would say, people are more conscientious about it. The consumers are demanding it more. I think there's a better framework. And I have to say, most of the investment community collectively has come together to think about this and propose plans. There's, I think, more education around the topic. And most importantly, there's a lot of financing that is very favorable for buildings and businesses that are engaging in sustainable practices. In Asia, what we're seeing from the investment community is very interesting. What our owners are telling us is, Gilda, you know what? We know that this pandemic may not be over. In fact, we're now thinking as to the fact that we will be operating in endemic environments going forward. It's going to be an endemic situation going forward. So how do we design the most efficient buildings, the most flexible buildings? How do we have flexibility with our staff? So, Arnie, I'm sorry I'm not giving you a uniform answer, but the reality is that there isn't coordination within the investment community. And I think the biggest challenge that we all have is the misalignments between investment horizon and the realization of this benefit in the longer term. From a disclosure perspective, that was the second part of your question. Again, it depends on which country and jurisdiction we are transacting. Sadly enough, it doesn't come up as much in the conversation these days in terms of, from a buyer or seller perspective, it's de minimis. It's really covered on a purchase and sale agreement in terms of reps and warrants, and insurance costs, but that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gilda. And believe me, I'd rather have reality in your answer than uniformity. It's a very complex issue that we're dealing with, and different companies that you're dealing with are reacting differently. So, Alex, you work with hotel owners all the time, the majority of whom are in the Caribbean and Mexico, and these are destinations where powerful hurricanes are inflicting extensive damage and expensive damage. So are you hearing concerns from owners about risks related to climate change, or is it, as Gilda is hearing, some yes, some no?
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. Unfortunately, I agree with Gilda. I think that the main issue is that there's not an alignment or a uniform language of what should we do collectively, not even within the G20. I mean, thank God now the US is back in the Paris Accord. That would help a lot to the region and influence other countries outside of the G20 to try to do the right thing and move in the right direction with a coordinated effort. But right now it's different in every part. Depends who do you ask and what's the horizon and what are the values of each of the investors or actors in the sector. So for some of the investors, this is something that is long-term and really matters. For some other investors, it's a 3 or 5 year turnaround, and they're going to do whatever brings the highest IRR. So I think that we should end up doing the right thing, not only because it's the right thing and our conscience tells us to do that, but also because the law tells us to do that. It should be illegal to do some things that have a higher carbon emission, or affect more the planet than other practices, even if they were more expensive. I mean, there's many things that we could go around the law. We could make our businesses more profitable, but we cannot go around the law. So we should have more strict laws, kind of universal, at least universal criteria. So we are forced to do that, but also because it's good business. I think that the more the people is educated, the more the people are leaving the changing weather and the global warming in their own communities, their own villages, their own towns, with their own people, the more that they care about it. So I think if you are not doing something as a company, as an enterprise, to really put in place practices that make a difference, if you're just not just saying it, but doing things that help the cause, you will lose a lot of talent. I mean, the young generations especially, they're not willing to work in a company where they don't share values. I think in order to retain the best talent, you need to align with their values. And I think the young people, for the most part, really want to do that. So I think we will become a better place to work and a better place to stay for all the guests that do care about this and are willing to pay and cooperate with this if we do the right thing. So it has to be based on our conscience, but if it's not, then based on the law. And if it's not, do it for money. Do it for the business. It's a better business and will become a better business the more environmental friendly and the more environmental practices you follow within the businesses. And of course, in our case, which we're in the resort business, hotels by design are not necessarily very high emissions, but we work with vendors. We're going to make sure they are the right ones that do care and are aligned with us. But also the new buildings that we're designing, they have to be more energy efficient, a lot more open areas, and we have to work in a way that we contaminate and use a lot less resources and our print is a lot smaller as possible. And of course, the give back programs. We have strong give back programs, whether it's at resort by cleaning beaches and streams and rivers, etc., but also in the communities where our staff are. We don't necessarily have resorts there, but our staff is. Now, I just want to finish saying that ironically, us that were in the travel business, we encourage people to travel. And traveling, mobility in general, pollutes. So, you know, I'm trying to convince millions of people every day to go on the plane, and we know what happens when people go on the plane. So we got to make sure that, yes, we won't prevent people to go on the plane. We're going to promote it, but do something in return. Focus on the offsets, number one, but then also focus on the technology to improve the path towards net zero, which is a more difficult challenge. But in the short term, there's many things that we can do to go to carbon neutral.
Alex, as usual, I appreciate your candor, and I'm sure everyone listening does as well. I also want to remind that I don't have a monopoly on the questions. On some platforms you might be watching this, there's a question or chat button. Feel free to ask your questions too. They'll be passed along to me. And Alex, while I've got you, Apple Leisure Group does more than operate hotel brands. It also owns tour packaging companies, a large receptive tour operation. And so I imagine this makes company-wide emission calculations and decarbonization efforts quite complex. So what are the main areas you're focusing on in terms of carbon reduction? What areas have you made the most progress on and which are the most challenging?
Well, certainly technology, when we design hotels and when we equip hotels and when we do the capital investments in the hotels, obviously we are oriented to have a lot more efficient equipment and also better designs. But I think one of the ways that we're really promoting and go to carbon neutral, eventually, I don't know if we're going to get to net zero or when, but it is by increasing the awareness. I mean, we approach and we communicate and we're in contact and in close relationship with millions of passengers and millions of guests. And so just increase the education, the level of awareness, the give back. And I think that's one of our main roles. And we had a lot of progress. I mean, I think that when people are in holiday and our company is strictly leisure, they are more open to learn things. They have more time to pay attention. They have more time to consult themselves inside and to really do what is right. And we do see all over the world that the most successful businesses are the ones that really connect to the souls and what the fulfilling is for the individuals. And I think that's something that we're doing. So we're pretty much advocating and sending the message and all of our best practices and trying to do that. One of the things, for example, one of the causes that I personally promote heavily is Saving Our Sharks, which is an association we have to prevent, not just to protect the sharks, but the sharks environment. The more guests we have in our hotels that are aware of that, aware of the importance of that, they're interested in doing that, the curiosity of that, the more they want to learn, the more they want to learn about what can we do in order to really reduce the print and make the planet cleaner. And I think we're doing a good job because people like it, wants to hear about it, wants to learn more about it, and they want to spread the word about it. So I think that's one of the most important roles that we have done.
And Alex, then getting back to my other question, do you have one overarching goal or do you have separate sub-targets for each of your divisions?
No, and it is very different, Arnie. What happens with our charters that we continue to use the airlines? Of course, you want to use the most efficient ones, the ones that pollute the least. But certainly, the technology that we are using overall. As a matter of fact, we have a lot less people now using cars to go to work because a lot of our staff, most of our staff now is working from homes, and I think that's here to stay. Most of our staff. But then on the hotel side, yes, absolutely, we do have standards and we do have requirements on the new hotels. But as you know, we're a management company. We don't own the assets. So we have some of our hotels that are 50 years old and they're not efficient. And we're in the job to promoting through capital expenses to make them smart and more efficient buildings. But then we also have the new generation, and the new generation, all the hotels that are right now in the pipeline, as well as the ones that we opened recently, they're way more efficient. So yes, we do believe that within the next 10 to 15 years, we should have a much smaller print and be more carbon neutral, besides all the offsets that we're focusing on a daily basis.
Thank you, Alex. Now, Ben, just kind of touching on something that Alex was talking about, he's got older properties. Boom Supersonic positions itself as a committed leader in environmentally friendly aviation. And Boom has an advantage in that you're not saddled with legacy equipment. Everything you're building can take advantage of the latest innovations in sustainability. Given that, are you going for net zero emissions or carbon neutrality?
Yeah, thanks, Arnie. That's a great question. So Boom's mission is to make the world dramatically more accessible through supersonic flight. I think we all would agree that travel contributes to quality of life in many ways. Julia and Gonzalo mentioned economic, but also political, spiritual, and cultural. So our goal is just like you said, introduce a new product that'll make the world a more connected place through the introduction of our commercial airliner Overture. which is a Mach 1.7, so twice as fast as existing aircraft, 65 passenger jet that is expected to enter service by the end of the decade. And so just like we're shifting the paradigm on speed, we're also committed to being a leader in sustainability. And so we joined the Race to Zero that Gonzalo mentioned by signing the Climate Pledge last year, committing to net zero by 2040. Now, net zero is certainly a challenge, but the technologies are all rapidly maturing. And as a manufacturer, we are eager to build those technologies in from the start. And so that's a full life cycle approach, taking into account the latest manufacturing techniques, designing for recyclability. But then sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, is really the key enabling technology to net zero carbon long haul flight. So SAF is made from truly renewable sources, waste cooking oil, forestry residues, municipal solid waste, so garbage, or algae, and by definition must be at least a 50% life cycle carbon reduction. Most modern SAFs are achieving an 80% reduction. But I'm particularly excited about the future of SAF, which is producing fuel from renewable energy and air, which is referred to as direct carbon capture or direct air capture, and truly closing the carbon loop and achieving a net zero carbon fuel. And so, I think, as it was mentioned earlier, getting a fully renewable grid is critical to that because you need to use renewable energy. But that is well within kind of the time horizon of the introduction of our product, which will be optimized to use SAF and is expected to be the first aircraft to receive certification using SAF.
Thank you, Ben. A question, is it possible for existing fleets, for the airlines that are out there now, how difficult would it be to convert to SAF? I know Richard Branson flew a SAF flight, I think, between Europe and the UK, but is it possible for conversion to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not without challenges. So right now, SAF is limited to a 50% blend with conventional Jet A, but there's a lot of work in the industry, and Boom is actively working alongside industry partners to promote the introduction of 100% drop-in SAF, which is a full SAF that could be used by just about any existing airplane. But then we're also looking ahead to the future of kind of next generation fuels that maybe couldn't be used in existing fleets. But absolutely, the near-term future is 100% SAF available to the entire aviation industry.
And the current hurdle is it expense or just scarcity? There's just not enough of it to go around?
Another good question. So it's twofold. One is certification and approval. So there is a safety question. It is a new fuel. That's a very, broadly pursued, answer is how to prove that 100% SAF is safe on existing planes. The other one then is, yes, production. Unfortunately, in 2019, only about 0.1% of aviation fuel was powered by SAF. But we're seeing a huge renaissance of support from private industry, from government, that's promoting the production of SAF. Just like any new and developing technology, you need market demand to facilitate scaling and reduce costs. So the US government is talking about tax incentives, and we've seen over $1 billion in just the last year from private industry putting investments to help scale SAF. And so we're very optimistic about the future of sustainable aviation fuel in the next decade.
Okay, thank you. Elie, Ben's company gets to build everything on the latest technology, but about 80% of the hotel inventory that's predicted to be in operation in 2050 already exists today. And hotels currently exist for about 2% of global carbon emissions. What are the key interventions required to become net zero in terms of existing infrastructure?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. We have the benefit of being large and have a long legacy and having 6,000 hotels around the world, 1 million rooms open under development, but that also gives us a legacy of infrastructure that we have to convert over time to more efficient energy consumption. And going back to our 1.5 degree science-based target, that's going to require a heavy lift, and really in 2 areas. First, we have a plan and a commitment that all of our new hotels by 2030 will be, I'd say, 0 or very low carbon emission properties by then. And we have designs in place and projects in place with industry partners and technology partners in all of our regions to start designing those properties. It hasn't been done in our industry before, but look, even during the pandemic, we're adding several hundred hotels a year to our business. Just like Arnold said, we are having to reduce our aggregate carbon emissions by 2030 by 50% while we're growing by hundreds of hotels per year, which really doubles the challenge. But we're committed to finding that 0 or near 0 new hotel build by 2030. And then you come to the existing estate, the thousands of hotels that we already have out there as ISG and in the industry. We have partnered with technology partners, with industry partners like Arup, Gleeds, and Schneider Electric to work on substantially decarbonizing existing properties. We worked on a UK hotel and came pretty close, finding passive activities like how we allocate the rooms, how we change the thermal fabric of the building. We published a report on this, to active measures like switching from fossil fuels to renewable and replacing the equipment in the property to higher efficiency equipment. Now, what is it going to take to get the retrofit of existing properties across the full industry to a far lower carbon intensity? It's going to take advances in technology and in science. It's going to take actions by organizations like ourselves to drive those standards and those options to property owners. As Gilda said earlier, we are, as a brand company, we're not the owner of the properties. Arnold owns their ships. We don't. So we have to motivate investors who sometimes have a shorter time horizon to make those investments. So part of it is us bringing those low-cost, efficient technologies to existing owners, but part of it really is taking advantage of government incentives and working with government, with regulators as they allocate government funds, as they create programs to create the proper incentives for investors and for property owners to retrofit. So we're advocating in Europe and in the United States and across the world at governments as they build their budgets. And you see big budget plans in the United States, right? A $3.5 trillion program, a $1 trillion infrastructure program. We're working with the US government to make sure that there are the right incentives in there to help hotels and help properties decarbonize. The third thing that we need, and Ben touched on it earlier, is the decarbonization of the grid. For us to get to 1.5 degrees, for the world to get to 1.5 degrees, we need decarbonization of the grid. So not only our technologies that come forward, not only our programs that go to our hotel owners, and on top of government incentives, there has to be decarbonization of the global grid. All of that together, I think, will bring the existing stock of hotels. Now, let's not focus just on hotels. All buildings, right? All infrastructure, physical infrastructure, whether you're talking about office buildings, homes, and schools, hospitals, all of that building stock needs to cooperate and collaborate to bring us towards that 1.5 degree trajectory.
Okay, thank you, Elie. Arnold, we've got a question from the audience for you. It says, please elaborate on Carnival's thinking about not incorporating carbon offsets for now when some other cruise groups are doing so.
Yeah, our focus again is on trying to ultimately get to true zero emission. And we're focused on working with other companies, NGOs, et cetera, and on technologies that'll help us do that. We're not against offsets or anything like that. And ultimately, we may have to depend on those as well to achieve our aspirations that we've articulated by 2050 of being carbon neutral. But we're cautiously optimistic we can get there through technologies and invention. So that's where we are right now. We'll continue to look at offsets, but we have successfully reduced our carbon intensity by 30% since 2009. 2006. And we've got the goal of 40% with the baseline being 2008 for that. And we continue, again, with the LNG, but also with other technologies, continue to strive to dramatically reduce and get to the goals by 2050.
Thank you, Arnold. Gilda, the Financial Stability Board, which was created during the 2009 G20 summit, established a task force on climate-related financial disclosures, and this group developed a framework, help public companies, other organizations disclose climate-related risks and opportunities. Now, WTTC is composed of about 200 of the largest travel companies, and they have resources and guidance to address some of these reporting issues. But how can climate risk reporting be facilitated among the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises that actually make up the majority of travel businesses?
You know, I'm going to go back to Alex's answer. It probably needs to be dictated within the legal framework for there to be an incentive to have all of, to provide all of these disclosures. But at the end of the day, Arnie, I think it's great to disclose and say, talk about intentions and these programs that you're doing. But at the end of the day, what matters is the action. So one of the things that we're very much focused on at JLL, to Elie's point, the commercial, just the real estate sector in general is responsible for about 40% of global energy consumption worldwide. Within that, the hotel business, we're a 24/7 business. So, the amount of energy that we're consuming is quite perverse, actually. I think we will get owners and investors to act and walk the walk, and then, the disclosures will follow. Just being forced by the capital behind it. So I do think that it is important to understand that without the owners actually investing in the buildings, investing in the capital expenditures that are required to get to just carbon neutral and net zero at the end of the day, there needs to be financial incentives to do this, okay? So one of the things I think that is important to understand, there's a lot of sustainable or impact funds that are being raised right now worldwide, and they are looking to invest in, let's say efficient buildings, green buildings, et cetera. So that's a very, very big factor. There are lenders, especially in Europe, as I said earlier in my segment, that are, financing a much more favorable lending rates for buildings that are more, that are greener. As the rest of the panelists have said, the consumer, especially millennials and centennials, they are, they want to go and stay in hotels, et cetera, businesses that match their values, and this is essential. So there is going to be a point where investing in green infrastructure is not just the right thing to do, but economically it will make sense. So we are going to get to a point where there will actually be a green premium or a brown discount if you're sitting on a building that is obsolete, that needs money, that is just polluting way too much. I think the disclosure section is very important, but what is disclosure without action? Okay, so what we need to do collectively is come up with, again, short, medium-term goals of actionable items that need to happen, in investments that need to be made. We need to reward and incentivize the small, medium enterprise as well, because a lot of these things that need to happen are very, very costly, and we're coming out of a major pandemic. So again, I think it's a collaborative effort with the government, with financial institutions, with the ultimate investors that are investing in this private equity funds, and also just making sure that we're looking after the small, medium enterprise, because these are, again, very, very expensive propositions. And in an environment like the last 18, 20 months that we've lived in, we know some of these funds are very limited right now. So we need to just make sure that there are the financial incentives and the support from the government and legal infrastructure to make this happen, Marty.
Thank you. Ben, Arnold had mentioned that CLIA and the IMO have specific goals for guidance for the shipping and cruising industry. So how engaged is Boom with trade groups such as the Airlines for America or Airlines for Europe, which have pledged net zero carbon emissions by 2050? And do you think that they're headed in the right direction, and are those ambitions realistic?
Yeah, we're thrilled to see the airline industry groups setting commitments in line with the Paris Agreement, and we're proud to partner with companies who share our vision. The United Order that we announced earlier this year was a first of its kind deal, purchase of 15 planes that included a commitment to net zero carbon operation. As a manufacturer, we're not directly involved with A4A, but we are actively involved in the Aerospace Industries Association and advocating for industry-wide commitments to net zero carbon there. As far as the feasibility, I absolutely think they are realistic with the advancements being made, particularly in SAF production, but it's a holistic approach beyond SAF. It's broader technologies, better engines, lower drag, next generation fuels, operational improvements. How often have you sat on the taxiway letting an engine idle? So increasing efficiency of movement. And then, certainly in the short term, relying on high quality offsets and direct sequestration.
Okay, thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left, and what I'd like each panelist to do, and Julia and Gonzalo, I'd like you to participate as well. And I'd like each panelist to share in one sentence, and I know there's going to be a challenge for some of you, what you would like to see happen in the near future as you do strive to achieve net zero. And why don't we start with you, Arnold? You're the chairman. You can set the pace.
Okay, one sentence. I'd
You're
like
done.
to see,
No, go ahead.
yeah, right, exactly. While maintaining a sense of urgency, a balanced consideration, for progress being made, so that we don't have abrupt regulations that will cause industries to suffer, lose jobs, and disrupt commerce.
Very good. Julia?
Yes, I think I agree with Arnold entirely, and I think we need good collaboration between government and the private sector, one to avoid those sort of misunderstandings. But also, sometimes governments, I know in aviation, for a plane to fly to A to B, they have to zigzag, and that needs governments to be brave, also to step up to make some of the important changes that are often political.
Okay. Gonzalo?
Well, I would say that probably, I would like to invite every single actor to join the Race to Zero, because there will be no tourism and travel sector that with emissions and destroying the environment. On the other side, there's a massive opportunity for a tourism sector that is zero emissions and that carries the message of solidarity that we need now in the world. So you have that power, use it.
Thank you. Elie? Oops, Elie, you may be muted.
Okay, sorry.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to see us do more of what we're doing today. Really discuss what this industry is actually doing already to improve the environment, reduce carbon emissions, and draw a path to net zero on a reasonable time frame. Other industries have celebrated their successes and got a lot of acclaim for them, while probably doing less. I think we're actually doing a lot in this industry, whether it's in cruise lines, whether it's in aviation, whether it's in hotels. We're doing a lot, and I think we need to get our story out, and WTTC can be a very strong advocate for getting our story out. That, I think, will achieve or help achieve what Arnold was talking about in terms of getting support for a realistic roadmap without getting it disrupted along the way.
Thank you, Elie. And Gilda?
Echoing my fellow panelists, so it would be a responsible, collective, and sensible approach to change that needs to start with education. I agree with Arnold. We need to protect jobs. 1 in 10 jobs are in the travel and tourism industry, and the vast majority of those jobs are held by women. So we want to make sure that whatever we do it in equilibrium and in a very sustainable way, never better said. So we need to be thoughtful about how we're going to do this going forward.
Thank you, Gilda. Ben.
Yeah, I think a lot of great ideas. I think Elie and Gilda hit on two of the key ones of kind of education and advocacy. One thing that is personally kind of near to my heart is focusing on a conservation of land and nature-based climate solutions, both for their environmental benefits, but also because enjoying nature is a big part of what makes travel so wonderful.
Okay, and Alex, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, thank you. No, I agree with everything that's said, but I think we need to do more on the carrot, on the incentive side, to continue to incentivize via taxes, via soft loans for those who are doing the right thing and they're doing rapidly. But at the same time, I think that we need to do also the stick. You not only do it because you have an incentive, but you cannot choose not to do it because you will be breaking the law. So I do think we need to be practical about it. Yes, without causing a lot of disruption, with things that are implementable, things that are realistic, things that are best practices already in place in some places. So just to give you a quick example, in Costa Rica, yes, it costs us more money and more time to build our hotels in Costa Rica, but they're there, they're open, they're working, and the consumer is willing to pay more to stay there because of that. So I think we have to be practical by having the incentive, but at the same time, having rules and regulations that force us to go on that direction.
Okay. Well, big thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry?
And I said that's a Walt Whitman sentence. That's very good.
Right. Well, thank you to all the panelists, all the speakers. Thanks to WTTC to invite me in on this conversation. I found it very, very interesting. We really appreciate your time and your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's program.